Hi, my name is Paul Copperman, and it's my honor to welcome you to the concluding event of the 35th Annual Observance of Holocaust Memorial Week at Oregon State University. Our 6 events so far have included 2 talks by Holocaust survivors, an examination of the role played by alcohol and by masculinity and how the 2 combined in promoting mass murder during the Holocaust. A scholarly review of Stalin's terror from 1936 to 39 in the USSR and Mao's Cultural Revolution in China between 1966 and 76, and how Stalin's brutality provided a model for Mao. And an inquiry into the disappearance or murder of many indigenous women, and into why this issue has received so little attention in American media. As for our 7th event, the one tonight, we'll get to that in a minute or 2. The events that we're offering this year cover a considerable range, and this is typical. Every year, we provide scholarly talks on the Holocaust and survivor accounts, but we likewise offer events focused on comparative genocides or large-scale violations of human rights. Many of our annual programs include concerts, plays, and films. In order to support these habits, this policy, but also not to charge admission for any of our events, we count on our chief sponsors and donors. These regularly include the Center for the Humanities, the College of Liberal Arts, the School of History, Philosophy, and Religion, the Provost's Fund for Excellence, the City of Corvallis, and Beit Am, as well as many private donations to the OSU Foundation's Holocaust Memorial Fund. By the way, if you wish to contribute, and frankly, if you just would like to know a bit more about the Holocaust Memorial Program and what we do and why we do it, and a record of our history, and what we hope to do in the future, please visit our website. Getting to it is pretty easy. Just Google up, I guess, the 3 magic words, Holocaust, Oregon State, and you will quickly be to our website, and it will show you all kinds of things, including, if you choose, how to donate. And now for tonight's presentation. It relates to a theme that our program often deals with, that is teaching the Holocaust. Just recently, the legislature and governor of Oregon have mandated Holocaust education in this state, K-12. The Holocaust Memorial Program at Oregon State University would like to do what we can to assist teachers who are involved in this or will become involved in this effort. And with that said, let me talk about more directly about tonight's event and about our truly distinguished speaker. The talk tonight fits in with our focus on teaching the Holocaust. It is entitled Teaching the Holocaust Through Film to Children, Tweens, and Teenagers. And our speaker is Lawrence Barron, or as he likes to be known, Laurie Barron. So that is how I'm going to refer to him. And Laurie has had an amazingly long career that I was interested to note today as I was reviewing his CV. Our passages have to some extent interlocked. He has a background at the University of Illinois in Champaign-Urbana, pursuing his bachelor's degree, and I was there pursuing my PhD. We overlapped, but he finally got his PhD in 1974 at the University of Wisconsin. He's had a lengthy and distinguished teaching career. I would particularly note his lengthy tenure at San Diego State University. Has taught there for many years, as well as elsewhere. There he was a professor of Jewish history at San Diego State. And he has published very extensively, has had an interesting career in this regard. Before I get to that, let me mention he has the Triple Crown of work at university. He's received awards and recognitions for teaching, for service, and for scholarship. I'll get to the scholarship in a moment. First, I might note his just some of his incredible service. In 1995, he founded the Western Jewish Studies Association Conference. He has headed up this conference ever since as president of the Jewish Studies Association, a remarkable record, and has headed up conferences, everywhere from Oregon to Oklahoma and many other places as well. So there's his service, there is his scholarship, which is remarkably broad. He's done extraordinary work on various topics of Jewish history, but to focus particularly on the Holocaust. He has done some admirable work on the altruists, the rescuers of Jews during the Holocaust and what made them tick. And then there is the book of his that is perhaps most relevant to tonight's event, is his book entitled Projecting the Holocaust into the Present, the Changing Focus of Contemporary Holocaust Cinema, published in 2005. And that part of that is going to feed into this presentation that he's going to be giving. Truly, I could not think of someone more desirable to have as the speaker for our topic tonight on Holocaust film for children. This is what he does, what he has been doing for many years, and doing just extraordinary work. And here we have an extraordinary scholar whose extraordinary scholarship is so relevant here. And also, as I said, will help for present, future teachers of the Holocaust, as well as for parents who are wondering what might be suitable for their kids. Okay, so I am going to turn it over to Lori. Just a couple of quick business issues. Please make use of the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen, which will allow you to enter questions for Lori. We won't be getting around to his answer or to those questions being asked. I'll be asking the questions that I read off the Q&A after Lori's presentation, and he will then deal, and I'm sure deal very well with each of those questions. So I am now going to turn it over to Lori Barron.
Well, thank you, Paul, and thank you for inviting me. And I also want to thank Aaron Sneller and Luke Brockman, who are taking care of the technical arrangements for today and for showing clips. I spoke here 11 years ago. In fact, I was surprised to see the video of that lecture is still online if you want to look it up. But if you do, you'll find it's very different than tonight's lecture. And I guess I did okay because you invited me back. Either that or I've returned to the scene of my crime. One of the things I do, I didn't do this the last time, but I've done this. I retired in 2012 from teaching, but I had started to do this in my courses. I write overtures to my lectures, just to give you a preview. And so I'm going to give you the overture and then I'll start. What should the younger folk view of films about what befell Jews? Anne Frank in the attic, or close friends torn apart, animals who comfort, or children who outsmart? What approach to advise? To teach but not traumatize? Should we use time travel to show what it was like to convey the horrors during the Third Reich? It's time for me to finish, and to end my song, I'll take questions afterwards if I don't run too long. So now let me begin. Today, as Paul and Aaron know, is my birthday. I am 75 years old. And though I am a retired history professor who got involved in film towards the end of his career, I spent several of my years getting a bachelor's in secondary education and being a substitute teacher to support myself in graduate school. Nevertheless, I've not been in the trenches of the public schools for many years, and I hope many in our audience are teachers or are parents who are wondering what to do, how to teach this subject to their kids, and that you can tell me after I talk, if I mention a film you've used, tell me if it worked or if it didn't work, and tell me things that I haven't used. I found all sorts of films preparing this. I should have had more. There's a handout. I don't know if the handout's available on the chat, but I list a lot of films, but as I was preparing the lecture, I realized how many I had left out, and some of which I'll be mentioning. The origins of this come from that book that Paul mentioned, and I was looking at partly to focus on more recent films, which were the 1990s up to 2005, but to do so looking at them, comparing them to the films that came out in the 1950s, 60s, 70s, and 80s. What was different? How were the subjects changing? How were the portrayals of these subjects changing? What kind of genres did they use? And one of the surprises for me in doing this book, I had no intention to talk about children's movies, but they were the fourth most common type of film in the 1990s, and they hadn't been previously. I also ended up doing an article after that, and have been keeping a database since then of what are the 10 best-selling perennial books 5 years after publication since 2000, using the Amazon.com and Barnes and Noble sales figures. And consistently over the past 20 years, I've been keeping this. At least 4 of the 10 are children's movies, are children's books. And many of those books, in fact, all the books that end up on that list have been made into movies. So there's this proliferation of children's things that start in the 1990s. Now, why is that? Partly it has to do with Holocaust education, which gets started in the 1970s in the public schools, not as a mandated subject, but as a recommended one, and then really takes off in the 1990s after Schindler's List and the opening of the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum. So you have that, and then you have a number of states beginning to require the teaching of the Holocaust, and what that does is create a market. And that market is not only for children's books, there have been a proliferation of children's books about the Holocaust, but also children's movies. Now, I'm going to be starting with K through 3 today, or 6 through 9 in terms of children's ages, but I should let you know that the Holocaust Museum does not approve of this. And in their teaching guidelines, they say students in grade 6 and above demonstrate an ability to empathize with individual eyewitness accounts and to attempt to understand the complexities of Holocaust history, including the scope and scale of the events. While elementary age students are able to empathize with individual accounts, they have difficulty placing them in a larger historical context. Oregon, which is a rare state, I should say, even though this mandating starts depending on whose account you read, either with California in 1985 or with New Jersey in 1994, the rush to introduce Holocaust education has really been something that has increased exponentially in the last 5 years, and Oregon is part of that. There are 21 states which now mandate the teaching of the Holocaust, 12 of which have come on board, like Oregon, in the past 4 years. 9 others encourage but don't mandate the teaching of the Holocaust. And of these school districts, very few, most of them require either from 6th grade on, 7th grade on, some as early as 5th, but very few states are like Oregon, which require it earlier. Florida, New Jersey, and Texas and Illinois require K through 12. And Oregon, actually not Texas, Texas is like Oregon. It requires 4th grade and above, though it talks about preparation for that 4th grade introduction. And this has raised the question of whether you should teach this material to K through 4 students. And there was a big debate going on in the late 1990s and at the beginning of the turn of the century, whether that should happen. A woman by the name of Harriet Sepinwall from New Jersey, which requires K through 12, wrote an article saying there is gradual inclusion of concepts for teaching about the Holocaust, more specifically for grade 4. Students of this age are being asked to explain how prejudice hurts everyone and the ways we all individually, as communities, as nations, and the world suffer because of it. We need to give examples of how prejudice has led to persecution and killing of groups of people, such as in the Holocaust, recognize and accept that each person is responsible for his or her actions and the ways their governments act. And she was met with a vociferous denunciation by a genocide scholar, Samuel Totten, who said, without contextualization, how will young students even begin to understand why children were in hiding, in need of rescue, or separated from their parents? Conversely, when such contextualization is provided, teachers are almost forced to enter the horrific aspects of the Holocaust, which is inappropriate for children this age. As for teaching what life was like in the ghettos, concentration camps, and death camps, I find this obscenely inappropriate. But like I said, Oregon does require this earlier. And in the SB 664 and the guidelines that have been written for it, they talk about teaching as early as 1st grade, where they say we need to understand, affirm, respect, and celebrate the diversity of individuals, families, and school communities. In second grade, we need to evaluate how individuals, groups, and communities manage conflict and promote justice and equality. And then finally, you get to fourth grade, where they say you begin to introduce the history more frontally. So I'm going to talk about these movies earlier because they exist. And I think also because kids, they hear about it. If they're watching movies, if they're watching television, let's say your child is a fan of the X-Men, they're going to know about the Holocaust. I mean, the X-Men movie begins with a scene in Auschwitz, and much of the motivation of Magneto, the villain, has to do with he's a Holocaust survivor who lost his parents in the Holocaust. So I think kids are going to have questions anyway, and I think beginning early is not a bad idea. Now, before I get to talk about some of these movies, I need to also talk about how do we approach this to students, because students are at different intellectual and emotional levels. So there are kids in third grade who are going to understand this material, and there are kids who it's just going to go totally over their head. They're not going to be able to deal with it. If you're a teacher, you're dealing with time constraints, and feature films are not always the best thing. Many of the movies I'm talking about, you might want to select a clip, contextualize that, and often that's also good because many of these movies do have offensive scenes that you're not going to be able to show kids. And finally, you have to deal with parents and the current atmosphere in our country to ban things that make students uncomfortable or that teach them about affect and empathy. And you have to do that, like I said, within the time constraints. Over a quarter of the Holocaust units that are given in grammar school and in high school are less than 1 week long. It's a lot to cover in 1 week. They're often covered not just in history courses, but in English courses, civics. They appear sometimes another 20% are 1 to 3 weeks. Only 10% of teachers have the luxury to spend an entire semester on the Holocaust or genocide. So dealing with that, you have to have all those issues in front of you. And that may mean waivers that parents have to sign to watch a movie. These are all things you need to consider. Adrian Kurtzer, who's written a book, My Mother's Voice, about children's literature, makes this point that if we want to teach about the Holocaust, we, especially for the earlier grades, we have to be upbeat and give positive stories. But if we want it to be about the Holocaust, it has to have what she calls a double narrative. And I'll tell you what she means by that. She says, if we persist in thinking that children need hope and happy endings, we will need to consider the strategy of employing a double narrative, one that simultaneously respects children's needs for hope and happy endings, even as it teaches us a different lesson about the history of the Holocaust. So you have a positive story, but the context of this is this horrific thing that's occurring. As I mentioned, many of the books, children's books, end up getting made into movies. And that's what some of the movies I'm going to talk about work well in class, because there's a book that can go along with it and the kids can read that book beforehand. And the books are age appropriate and the movies are generally age appropriate. So the first one I'm going to talk about is Eve Bunting's The Terrible Things, which is a very popular book for this age group from K through 4. It's an allegory. And one of the things that they stress, there's a wonderful thing on your Oregon State website, which has a woman from California State University in Los Angeles talking about teaching books for first, second, and third graders and what you should choose. And one of the things she stresses is a kind of distancing strategy that these movies employ and that these books employ. And that's that you don't, sort of plunge kids into this. First, you do it kind of by allegory. Often it will be about animals experiencing these things, animal characters, or you do it through animation. You don't show the horrors, but there's this kind of distancing thing that's going on. And The Terrible Things, if you know it, is about these terrible things that come into the forest, and there's a bunch of rabbits. And first, the terrible things take away all animals that have feathers. Eventually, they go for those with quills, those with those that swim in the water, and eventually all those animals that are white. And there's this baby rabbit who keeps on asking his parents, why are they taking them away? And the parents keep on saying, well, we shouldn't get involved. And besides, this kind of animal does these kinds of bad things. Maybe it's not so bad. And at the end, when almost all the animals have disappeared because the terrible things have taken them, the little rabbit says, maybe if we had spoken up, they wouldn't have taken all the animals. And there's a little bit of an epilogue relating this in very age-appropriate ways to the Holocaust and other events where people have been persecuted. It's all based on Martin Niemöller's famous statement, first they came for the socialists, I did not speak out because I was not a socialist. Then they came for the trade unionists, I did not speak out because I was not a trade unionist. Then they came for the Jews, I did not speak out because I was not a Jew. Then they came for me and there was no one left to speak for me. So let me show you a clip here from Terrible Things. And this is just a clip, but it illustrates the whole movie. You can find these, what's the point you want to make, and find a clip that makes it and then explain what precedes it and the historical background. So let's show a clip from the Terrible Things. This is available streaming on any website. It's not really a movie. Someone made it privately, I think, and they put it up, and it works well. So.
Now there were no birds to sing or squirrels to chatter in the trees, but life in the clearing went on almost as before, until the day the terrible things came again. Little Rabbit heard the rumble of their terrible voices.
We have come for every creature that swims.
Oh, we can't swim. And we can't swim.
The frogs dived deep in the forest pool, and ripples spiraled like corkscrews on the dark brown water. The little fish darted this way and that in streaks of silver, but the terrible things threw their terrible nets down into the depths, and they dragged up the dripping frogs and the shimmering fish and carried them away.
Why did the terrible things take them? What did the frogs and fish do to them? Probably nothing, but the terrible things don't need a reason. Many creatures dislike frogs, lumpy, slimy things, and fish are so cold and unfriendly. They never talk to any of us.
Now there were no birds to sing, no squirrels to chatter, no frogs to croak, no fish to play in the forest pool. A nervous silence filled the clearing, but life went on almost as usual.
Thank you. There's for older kids in that 9 through 12 range, there's a very similar sort of cartoon called The Hangman by Maurice Ogden, which you can get online. And it's about a hangman who comes to town and says, I'm going to, bring order, find the people to punish. And the first person he punishes is an immigrant and hangs him. The second is someone who protests that, and then a Jew, and then a black. And then the narrator wonders why is this happening? Why can't we complain? And the hangman says, first the alien, then the Jew. I did no more than you let me do. So that's a middle school one, a little bit tougher, but again, animated, so not horrible. Animals are a way, a hook. Some of you may know the works of Simone Schwaber, amazing education professor who's done probably the most research, very systematic research on what works and what doesn't work in schools. And she was observing a third grade teacher, and at the end, I forget whether I think they were talking about Number the Stars. And at the end, one of the kids asked, after Jews are taken away, what happened to their pets? Well, that's a kind of question a kid would ask. And actually, there's a cartoon that answers that, a lovely little stop action film called Chica the Dog in the Ghetto. Again, you can get this online. You don't have to buy it. But it's about the kind of context. Why does this family have to go into hiding? It's done very gently. You don't see any terrible, terrible things. But what you do see is they do have to go into hiding. And to go into hiding, they have to give away the dog. And of course, at the end, the dog is given back by a neighbor. But you get an idea of persecution, the privation, what it's like to be in a tunnel, hiding underground, worrying about being captured. That's worth doing as well. And there's another one which I think I've maybe put in the later category, but which I'm using all the common sense media evaluations of what age groups. This one can be used for 8-year-olds. It's the HBO, The Number on My Great Grandpa's Arm. It's based on a children's book, which is actually for younger kids. And it's basically a young kid interviewing his grandfather. It has some real footage from the Holocaust, but it softens it by animating it and not showing the worst aspects of the Holocaust, and very simple explanations. So as the grandfather, who's very lovable, and because he's a survivor, you know, he didn't die. And we know from a lot of research on survivors and their children that actually many survivors didn't talk about this to their kids, but grandparents did talk to their grandchildren and felt more comfortable. So, but it's very easy to understand. Example, the kid hears for his father talking about his grandfather talking about the persecution of Jews, and he tries to explain it to the audience of his peers. Germany had bad problems and Hitler blamed them on the Jews. It's not very difficult to understand, and it's a lovely little piece as well. Now, when you get to the 10 to 12-year-olds, here more students will understand, and I think they will be exposed to a lot of movie and TV violence anyway. And by all the sorts of things I'm talking about, many of these lessons you can find also in fairy tales, in Disney movies, the persecution of the different person, you know, the violence of villains. These are things that kids are used to. But when you get into this older group, they're looking for more reality. And many of these films are about friendship between a Jew and a non-Jew, and how it holds despite the Holocaust, how the kids are really the ones who see what's going on better than their parents. So it empowers children as well. And here it's based on, some of you probably know Lois Lowry's Number of the Stars. This is one of the most popular. It's always in the top 10 of those bestsellers. And Disney made a movie which they didn't base on it, but I think they plagiarized from it, called Miracle at Midnight, which you can get online, and you can also purchase the DVD, and you can find from various streaming services. And it's about close girlfriends in Denmark, and when the Nazis come, or when the Germans come and want to arrest the Jews, the parent, you know, the daughter pleads for her parents to hide her friend's parents and her friend, and the parents eventually do. And they're, you know, it's Sam Waterston is the father. Of course, he's going to hide Jews. And Mia Farrow is the wife. And they debate how they have to do this, because what would they tell their children? The mother initially doesn't want to do it. She doesn't want to endanger her children. But then the father says, but if we don't do it, you know, what do we tell our children about being good people? And so it's a lovely thing. I would have shown that, and I think I showed it the last time I spoke here. But that's an exceptional story, because Denmark was an exceptional place where the vast majority of Jews were rescued. But the one I'm going to use, because I could get the clip for it, is Friendship in Vienna, another Disney movie, by the way. That was one of the tip-offs for me that things were changing when Disney started making Holocaust movies, which begins in the 1980s with Friendship in Vienna, with Jane Alexander and Ed Asner. And it's based on a book by Doris Orgel called The Devil in Vienna, about a friendship between two girls, the Christian girl, Lisa, and the Jewish girl, Inga, and what happens to their friendship after the Anschluss to Austria, or right as that's beginning to occur and after. Lisa's father is a Nazi sympathizer who joins the stormtroopers once the Anschluss occurs. Her brother is a member of the Hitler Youth. They forbid Lisa to be friends with Inga. The Jewish parents are just as wary of their daughter being friends with these people, with this girl whose parents are Nazis. And a key scene in there is after the Anschluss occurs and the classroom is beginning to change. They're getting rid of all the books that have Jewish characters or have Jewish authors. And then the teacher comes up with this, and this clip sort of illustrates that kids can be smarter than their parents. So let's show that. Yeah, good.
Students, please gather their things and stand. Auerbach.
Finally, y'all, I am in therapy. I've always heard people say that.
Skip through that. Yeah, good. Sorry.
Bonenvold. Goldblum. Roth. Seligman. And Vintonitz. You six will change your seats with the girls in the back row.
It's my seat.
Listen, Inga, I don't remember giving you permission to have a private conference. Lisa, you will return to your seat. Lisa, you've made your gesture. You've made your point. Now go back to your seat. All right, Lisa. I hope you're aware of the consequences of your actions should the new director enter the room.
She goes home and her father beats her for doing this. This is a tougher movie than Miracle at Midnight. There is menacing of Inga's mother is basically the victim of a prank which injures her from Lisa's brother. The father and the grandfather are among the Jews who have to clean the sidewalks with toothbrushes after the Germans enter. And there's even an attempt to blackmail the father and claim that he's had inappropriate relations, they don't say what that means, with his Aryan maid at the house. But in the case, in the end, it's Lisa and her mother persuading their priest to give false baptismal certificates to Inga's family so that they can immigrate to Yugoslavia, which allowed converted Jews to come, but only if they had been converted before 1936. And in the end, there's never any communication between Inga and Lisa, and it leaves it at that. So there's positive characters in here, the priest, obviously Inga, and there's negative characters. The Jewish characters are very positive, particularly Ed Asner as the grandfather, and it's done very well. A more recent movie for this age group is the movie When Hitler Stole Pink Rabbit. Some of you may know this. This is a very popular book by Judith Kerr. Her father was a very prominent theater critic, but very critical of the Nazis. He had to flee in 1933 when the Nazis come into power. And basically, When Hitler Stole Pink Rabbit is about what it's like to be a refugee. Very timely now. Yes, we have some of the backdrop of what Nazism is about and how Jews are treated, but the family first goes to Switzerland and then eventually to France. And it's about really what it's like to learn a new language when they go to France, what it's like to be the outsider. Even when they're in Switzerland, the German they speak isn't well understood by the Swiss, who speak a different kind of German. And this is directed by an Oscar-winning director, Carolyn Link, whose movie Nowhere in Africa you might know. And as she puts it, she says, children do not have to be afraid of this story. It is not cruel or horrible, but rather has many positive aspects despite all the melancholy, through the fact that Anna and her family lose their home, their prosperity, and their native language because of a sudden change in politics. I'm going to show you the trailer. I couldn't get the whole movie to make a clip, so.
Das ist Anna aus Deutschland. Der Flüchtling. Sie geht jetzt mit uns in Klasse.
Herzlich willkommen, Anna.
Super. Angst manchmal, Papa, Moment.
Ja, wovor denn?
Vor dem Anstecker. Macht es dir nichts aus, Flüchtling zu sein?
Doch. Aber ich finde es auch ganz interessant.
Die Juden müssen doch überall die Besten sein, oder?
Letzten Dienstag sind sie da mit einem LKW gekommen und haben eure Sachen abgeholt. Kannst du dich an Professor Teitelbaum erinnern? Da haben sie ihn in einen Hundezwinger gesperrt und ihm eine Eisenkette angelegt.
Wissen Sie, man geht nicht zum Vergnügen ins Exil. Du liebst das Land, in dem du Kind warst. Du liebst die Menschen, du liebst die Sprache.
Das sah gar nicht gut aus. Ich glaube, die Mama hat geweint.
Die 45 hat sich keine besser. Da brennt ein warmes kleines Licht in deinem Herz, Anna. Schütze es. Lass nicht zu, dass es von irgendjemand oder irgendwas gelöscht wird.
Luke, by the way, if you could check when the sound is a little garbled, I wonder if you have the optimized sound feature on. It's coming over a little bit garbled. So if you could check that before the next clip, that'd be great.
Gotcha.
Okay, one film I didn't mention, which I think you could show to earlier grades, but most of the things say 10 and above, is the movie. I don't usually do documentaries, but this is one that I would recommend. Paper Clips. Some of you may know this. Paper Clips is about a blue-collar Tennessee community in Whitwell, where a middle school class attempts to gauge the magnitude of the World War II and the Holocaust by collecting paper clips, each of which represents a human life lost in the Nazi slaughter of Jews. The idea came in 1998 when 3 of the teachers of the school were completing their unit, and one of the students asked, I can't conceptualize 6 million. So they decided they would they put out a call to collect 6 million paper clips, and it eventually snowballed. They ended up collecting 25 million paper clips from around the world. The idea of the paper clip was in Norway, the resistance, people wore paper clips as a way, because paper clips were, at least a certain kind of paper clip was invented in Norway. Keep that in mind when you play Jeopardy, but only pose it as a question. The students thought that meant that they wore paper clips also to protest the deportation of the Jews. It was more sort of a nationalist protest against the German occupation. But it was well-meaning, and eventually, like I said, they raised far more. They got 6 million, then they raised another 5 million for the non-Jewish victims that Hitler had killed. They created a museum. They were able to find a railway car that had transported Jews and purchase it and raise the money for doing so. And they were able to bring Holocaust survivors who appear in this film, and also Miep Gies, the woman who rescued Anne Frank. Let me show you, just again, gives you a sense, it's the trailer, but it gives you an overall sense of what this is about. And again, it empowers kids because you could really do something. And there's criticisms of it. What does it mean if you equate a paperclip with a person? And they made this historical mistake because paperclips weren't necessarily protesting Jews. But I think it gives you a sense of the magnitude. I always used to try to do this in my first lecture on the Holocaust, and it's very difficult. I would do it with cities. Imagine this city disappeared, and it had 6 million residents. Or I sometimes did it with 9/11, and how many years of 9/11s you would have before you would have 6 million. So let's show that clip.
Our goal was to teach children what happens when prejudice goes unchecked. We're a community of 1,600 people. We really have no diversity.
The Ku Klux Klan was founded only about 100 miles away.
One of the hardest things for them to comprehend was that Hitler murdered 6 million Jewish people.
A student said, "What is 6 million? I've never seen 6 million."
In the 1940s, people wore paperclips to represent the people who were in the Holocaust at that time.
And we all said, this is the idea.
It began in a school.
Can we write letters to some people and see if they'll send us some paper clips?
Spread to a town.
The whole community is involved in it.
The attached paperclip is in memory of my grandfather.
25,000 pieces of mail.
Something's going on over here.
Across the nation.
I'm sending you one paper clip.
We have some from Tom Hanks, Bill Cosby, former President Bush.
And throughout the world.
Paperclips just coming in by the millions.
They're all addressed to Anne.
This is Anne Frank.
I can't get over that.
I don't think it had ever occurred to them that there were people in this world who never knew their grandparents.
I was in Auschwitz for 3 years, and I'm glad I can come and talk to you nice people.
If we have made such a big difference, think what the rest of the world could do if they tried.
I wish the whole world was like you are.
It's a sweet film. All right, once we get to 13 and above, you have lots of choices. There are so many PG-13s. In fact, PG-13 category was created to bridge. There used to only be PG, and it was to bridge that gap between that and R-rated films. And most filmmakers try to get PG-13. That guarantees the largest audience. You get both teenagers and adults to those films. And so there's a lot, and these are longer. Some of the movies I've been showing are shorter, some of the so that you can show them in class. Here you may, you'll have to set aside a whole class or even two, or have them watch it at home, because many of these things are available through streaming or on DVD or on the cable movie channels. But one of the things that's missing in all those earlier ones is the perpetrator perspective and why people did this or why people were bystanders. You get a little bit of that in certainly in Terrible Things. Films, one film that you can certainly show a clip of, you can't show the entire thing, mostly because of language. Though in other countries, it's rated 13 through 16. In the United States, it's rated R, is the HBO movie Conspiracy. But it's about the meeting where the German bureaucrats figure out how they're going to implement the final solution. And the debate is, so you have no graphic pictures, and the debate is not so much about the horrific things they're going to do, but about sort of legal technicalities. Should we kill women, should we kill the Jewish husbands of German women who married Jews? And that's a big debate in it. And so you watch this and you realize they're not debating, it's not the end that they're interested in, it's the means to get to that end. What's the best way to pursue this policy? By showing certain clips of some of these debates, I think you can really drive across to students, this is a bureaucratic process, but it's also driven by a kind of racial fanaticism where it doesn't even matter whether you're Jewish, it matters whether your grandparents, 3 of your grandparents were Jewish. And I think you could use it well. But going back to showing films that deal with children, I would focus on child perpetrators. There's a movie, again, a Disney movie, Swing Kids. It's done by one of his subsidiary companies, Buena Vista, but nonetheless, it gives you a sense of peer pressure, the sense of community, feeling superior, that kids who join the Hitler Youth or just German kids who were proud of the movement felt. And if you know the movie, Swing Kids were kids who liked jazz and swing dancing, both of which were banned in Nazi Germany because they were seen as the music was seen as what they called jungle music, black music, promoted by Jewish promoters. So a lot of jazz musicians were also Jewish. And so they had to meet underground. So it wasn't necessarily a political protest. They just liked this culture, but they end up, a number of the boys end up joining the Hitler Youth. One becomes really impassioned about what they're doing and, that they play these physical games together. And it's like camping and, they're the elite and they learn why Jews are inferior to them. and one boy whose father had been arrested by the Nazis and was ultimately killed by the Nazis is not buying it. And this is a debate between the two. And by the way, yes, it is a very young Christian Bale who appears as the more pro-Nazi kid. Sean Leonard, if you're House fans, from the TV series House. But it has a number of other great actors. Kenneth Branagh is in there, Barbara Hershey. And though it doesn't focus on what's happening to the Jews, you do see one Jewish boy being beaten, and they basically walk away. It's not their concern. But when their own friend, who's a jazz musician and who is handicapped and is also admires a gypsy musician, has his fingers and arms broken and commits suicide because of that, then they realize where this is going. And so let's show that clip of the confrontation between the pro-Nazi and the one who is less enthusiastic.
Just worried about the way you've been acting lately. I know Arvid's death shook you up, but you've got to forget about it.
Forget about it.
Yeah, you've got to. He's just one person.
He was our friend.
Doesn't matter. Peter, you can't save everybody. There are more important things now. Anytime we could be at war.
If you side with the Nazis, then we're at war. You and me, Thomas. I'm not going to forget about Arvid. They murdered him. They murdered my father.
Wait a second. What are you talking about? Arvid killed himself. Arvid was a cripple. He didn't belong.
What's happened to you? He was a cripple? He killed himself because he didn't want to become a murderer. Don't you see this?
Stop, Peter, stop talking this way.
Stop it. You gotta go along, make the best of things. They want us to spy on our own parents. Don't you understand? God knows what else they'll do.
Not charged. We can't know what's really going on.
They're evil, Thomas.
Shut up! I'm not hearing this. You don't know what you're saying. Do you want me to... Just go along. Just make the best of things.
Then there are a number of movies that deal with children evading or actually rescuing themselves, Jewish children. A lot of the 9 through 12 deal with Jewish kids being the beneficiaries of Christian help. And in fact, the most famous, of course, is The Diary of Anne Frank. I don't know where people would place that, but it's usually the Jews are at the mercy of Christians who help them. They don't do anything to help themselves. But there are a number of movies, some of which you can use for 9 and 12. A wonderful movie called Fanny's Journey, for example, which is about a young French girl who's basically charged with leading a bunch of her friends to the Swiss border when the Germans invade southern France, where the Jews had been safe until 1942. And she does it. And there's one called Belle and Sebastian, which uses the same basic idea of a young kid helping smuggle people across the Alps, Jews across the Alps. But there are others dealing with kids who resist. Some of you may know the movie The White Rose or Sophie Scholl, The Final Days, about a group of college students. And though it's unrated, these movies are for 13 to 16-year-olds. And this is a group of college students who leafleted against the Nazis and ended up being executed for doing so. But there are scenes in their trial and discussions in which they talk about this. You certainly can excerpt if you don't want to. The executions aren't shown graphically, by the way, so don't worry about that. But these are powerful movies and deal with what's happening to the Jews. But then there's others about Jewish children just managing to survive underground. not in hiding. And probably the one I like the best, so there's two, and they're both by the same author and both very popular children's books. The Island on Bird Street, based by the Israeli author Uri Orlov, is excellent. I couldn't find a good clip. They used to have it, so I'm not going to show the clip, but it's about 11-year-old Alec who lives in the Warsaw Ghetto with his father and uncle, so we have the ghetto experience here. And you see the gradual process of things getting worse, of ghettoization and confinement, and being cut off from the world. The young boy is an avid reader and he's reading Robinson Crusoe. His uncle educates him, gives him these books and a mezuzah. His father gives him a gun and trains him to defend himself. The uncle is killed and deported. The father escapes to fight in the resistance. And the boy is left in the abandoned Warsaw Ghetto. And like Robinson Crusoe, then he creates an island with all sorts of sleuths and ladders and things that he can navigate. So if the Germans come in, he can hide, and he forages for food and supplies in the empty apartments of Jews who've been deported. He has his own little pet. Friday is his pet mouse, and in any case, it's based on real life. Orlov remembers living with his mother in the Warsaw Ghetto and salvaging what he could from empty apartments. His mother was killed, and he and his brother were deported to Bergen-Belsen. But it is telling he chose to end the island on Bird Street with him being reunited with his father, the double narrative that I talked about. But he wrote another book, which was made into, I think, an even better movie called Run Boy Run. And by the way, a number of these movies are foreign movies and they use subtitles. I don't think having students read subtitles is a bad thing. And I think it's probably a good thing. We need to have students doing more reading. And if COVID has taught us anything, Americans are starting to get used to subtitles. They're watching movies with subtitles. This is it's based on a true story also. A man by the name of Yoram Friedman, who is called Shrulik in here. His father is on the verge of being apprehended and deported, and he sends his son away, commanding him, forget your name, your mother and father, but never forget that you're a Jew, even though you are going to have to hide it. And he wanders through the countryside. He finds some peasants who help him, some peasants who want to turn him in. You'll see in the clip I'm going to show you a doctor who won't operate on him when he thinks he's Jewish. One of his problems, a theme in a number of Holocaust movies, is he's circumcised. So he can, though they don't show his penis, so don't worry about that. But when he gets together with a bunch of Jewish boys who are hiding in the forest as partisans, and they get together and they pee, they have a peeing circle. They say, you're going to have to hide this if you go and live among the Gentiles. And he tries to do that. He has to learn the catechism when he finally finds a woman, Polish peasant woman who will hide him, who's very kind to him. And he learns to be Catholic and to take on a very Polish name. But she gets found out, her house is burned, he has to move on. And he loses his arm as a farm worker in farm machinery. And at the end, he's not sure whether he wants to be Jewish or whether he wants to be Catholic and fit in. But the Jewish agency from Israel is looking for orphaned kids. And eventually he makes the decision to go to Israel. And you see the real man in the final scene, so you know that he survived. This is the trailer for that film.
Nie zapominaj nigdy, że jestem Żydem. Słyszysz?
Finland!
Musisz przeżyć.
Uciekłeś z getta?
Dawaj!
Nie się, co było wcześniej.
Robi się tu dla ciebie zbyt niebezpiecznie.
Zresztą Judy.
Nie.
Kłamiesz.
bene mia. Miał podmierzyć.
Niemożliwe. Co to jest Polakiem?
Poza tym jest adesso, koledzy.
Widzisz? Przeciwko życiu.
Jesteś najdzielniejszym mężczyzną, jakiego znam.
Sam Hitler odrąbał ci rękę.
Jestem Żydem! Zostawcie mnie w spokoju!
Z przyszłością naszego narodu.
I like this film a lot because it shows both sides. And I think it's important, not to, this is in the guidelines from the US Holocaust Memorial Museum, not to stereotype groups or people, whether it be Germans or Poles or whatever. There are people who helped, there are people who didn't. Those numbers don't necessarily equal each other, but you want to show that those capabilities are on both sides. Like I said, I didn't mention the Diary of Anne Frank because there's so much that's been done about the Diary of Anne Frank. Obviously it's this notion of spiritual resistance through writing, but most of the original Diary of Anne Frank, the one that most people read, and the first movie are really about Anne's adolescence, her first love, her becoming an author, dealing with her parents. And the Holocaust is something that looms in the background, but it isn't very prominent. There's one scene in there where she has a nightmare. She imagines her friend in a camp. And that, by the way, is taken from a Polish movie that was filmed at Auschwitz in 1948 called The Last Stop, but you don't know that. And it's not credited, by the way, either in the credits. But then, at the end, when Father Otto comes back, he talks about how everyone he knew was dead. That his children are dead, his wife is dead. He's been asking as he's come back from Poland. So we know something terrible happened, but then that's offset by Anne, the picture of all the birds flying into the sky and Anne saying, "I still believe people are good at heart." So it's a problematic film. The more recent films, and by the way, Anne Frank is the most frequent subject of Holocaust movies. There are over 20 Anne Frank films. There's one that just came out in Israel. There's a series that Netflix is making with Liv Schreiber right now. So there are films upon films. The more recent ones, which are based not just on the original Diary of Anne Frank, which we all read as kids, but really on the expanded, the definitive one. And we know that Otto Frank, who edited his daughter's diary, cut out a lot of parts that were uncomfortable for him. He universalized the story. He wanted it to be a universal, not a particularly Jewish story. And much of that gets restored in the definitive version of the diary. And we also now have, Anne wrote 3 different drafts of the diary. We have all 3 different drafts of the diary. She had a lot of time on her hands. And so we know a lot more about Anne. She's not so sexually naive as we thought, but we also know where she died. And the original film doesn't deal with that. The more recent films do. And they don't end with Anne being arrested. They end with Anne in Bergen-Belsen and dying. So they're a lot tougher. And Anne Frank, the whole story, which is a little long because it was a mini series, is very good from 2001. One that is more recent that's very, very good is called My Daughter, Anne Frank. It's a German film. But one of the things it does is it intercuts interviews with Otto Frank, with Anne's childhood friends, there's an interrogation scene of the Dutch policeman led the raid, who led the Germans to the attic. And so you get a much broader picture, and it does take you into the camp as well. So that would be, you can find things there if you want to show the whole thing, or if you want to show clips and have your students be reading that. That's a good way to do it. Like when Anne says, Jews have always been treated this way, we've always been persecuted. That gets changed in the original movie too. Many people have been persecuted. The Jewish element is removed. So you can talk about things with 13 to 16-year-olds about those kinds of changes, and they can become more movie literate of how films change things. Finally, and if we want to go into concentration camp experiences with kids, the obvious is Jane Yolen's The Devil's Arithmetic, also made into a movie. Common Sense Media says it could be used for 12-year-olds. The movie is more graphic. The movie does something almost no other Holocaust movie does. It goes into the gas chamber while people are being gassed. It does so in a tasteful way, but almost in a way that you see these young girls, you see them from the neck up, even though they're obviously nude, being gassed. And then at the end, you see this pile of young maidens, but they look very peaceful. It's not this violent kind of scene. And then the young girl who has time traveled, she got drunk at a Seder and time traveled to where her aunt was from and became basically her aunt's cousin, and who sacrificed herself so her aunt could live. But you see a concentration camp there. It's not a perfect portrayal, but it gives you kids a sense of how harsh it was, the sort of labor, the sort of deprivation, the sort of arbitrary punishments that occurred, the cruelty. But it's done within this young adult kind of science fiction-y approach, and kids like it. And so that's one way to go. One that I would say a no-no for is The Boy in Striped Pajamas, because it's based on this whole mistaken identity theory that young Bruno, the German boy and son of the SS commandant of a concentration camp, becomes close friends with a Jewish boy who is behind the fence. He's the boy in striped pajamas. And they have lengthy conversations at the fence, talking to each other, throwing balls to each other. That could never have happened. That kid would have been shot or electrocuted, and the young boy would have never been able to stand, the German boy would never have been able to stand outside. But they make it into a game, and as you know, at the end, he wants to play the game of coming into the camp and wearing the striped pajamas, and he gets gassed along with his friend. But the problem with that last scene is your sympathy doesn't go to the Jewish boy and all the Jewish kids that are it goes to the German boy, because it's mistaken identity, and to his parents, even to the SS father, who are now totally bereft that their son has died. If you know the original book that it's based on, it says, The Boy in Striped Pajamas, a fable. There's no sort of warning like that in the movie. It's done as straight reality. And so I don't like it. A lot of people use it. It's in the top 10 that I talked about, but I wouldn't use it if I were you. A harder film to find, but it is on DVD. I can't find it anywhere on streaming services. It's a little known film called Look to the Sky, originally titled Jonah Who Lived in the Whale. It's based on a memoir by Jan Oberski, who was living in Holland when the Germans showed up. He was 4 years old, and he wrote a memoir from the perspective of a 6-year-old in a concentration camp. And they've made this into a movie. His parents first were in Westerbork, which was the Dutch transit camp, and then in Bergen-Belsen. And what's interesting about it, you see the harshness of the camp, but you also see that kids found a way, and there's actually research on this that indicates this, found a way to play in the camps. They found ways to make games out of things, out of their privation. And he learns, he works with kids in the sorting out place where confiscated belongings and clothing. And these kids learn they can smuggle stuff out. Sometimes there's food. They learn if they work in the kitchen, they can get extra food. and they're able to survive. His father dies, his mother and he are on a train where the Germans are trying to remove them so they don't fall into the hands of the Allies, but the deportation train is bombed, and his mother doesn't survive. And then he comes back to Holland and he has to adjust with an adoptive family with all of this on his mind. So it deals not only with the concentration camp experience, but from a child's perspective, but also with the kind of long-lasting traumatic effects of how difficult it is to create a normal life. There is one scene you're probably going to have to cut out. Otherwise, the movie is unobjectionable, I think, for showing certainly to high school students. And that's where the mother and father, and the last time they see each other, have sex. They're covered up with a coat, but probably, given the current climate in our school system, that wouldn't go over. But let me show you a clip of that trailer. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about Schindler's List and then turn it over to you.
My name is Jonah. I was born in Amsterdam. The soldiers came and told Mummy and Daddy we'd have to go away.
Daddy's got one too.
They loaded us onto a truck, a lot of people we didn't know. 3 years have gone by now, and instead of sending us to Palestine, the soldiers brought us here. After some planes bombed the camp, the soldiers took us to a station.
It gives you an idea how you can do that material. Finally, Schindler's List, I mentioned, is R-rated, but it's very available. It probably has more, other than Anne Frank, probably more background material and teaching lessons that you can find for any other film. I use it for clips, though it's readily available on most, it's being shown all this month, I think on Showtime or on HBO. But it obviously has it has graphic violence, it has nudity, its length is problematic, but there are a number of scenes you can pick out that show a good deal about the Holocaust. I would even say the opening scene where you see the Jews praying, lighting Shabbat candles, and then the lights go out and there's only one person, and as the candle goes out, the smoke rising is match cut with the exhaust rising from a train smokestack, and Jews who are dressed as they normally did give their names to a Jewish consul clerk. These are the Jews who helped administer the ghettos for the Germans, and you see their name typed out. So someone whose face you see becomes just a bureaucratic line, a name that's typed out, and of course at the end those names are typed out and they become people again. But you can talk about that whole scene. What was life like for Jews before? It gives you a little bit of that. What is it like to be totally, what is a smoke? By then students might know, what does that smokestack mean to you of that train? What does that train? What does a train mean? They may know these things by then because I expect they've been exposed to the Holocaust. A scene that I like a lot is a scene where Schindler is in many ways like Amon Gert, the commandant of the camp there. He's a womanizer, he's a boozer, he's corrupt. But early on, Stern asked Schindler to help a young woman whose parents are in the camp and that Gert runs, and to get him a job in Schindler's factory. Schindler dislikes the idea because he is being perceived as a good guy, as the savior of Jews. And Stern, you can almost imagine Stern as an angel on one shoulder, trying to coax Schindler into helping the girl, and Gert's behavior as the devil, trying to tell him, well, I can just, not go along with this and not be a good guy. And in the only flashback in the movie, you have a flashback to which Stern narrates, in which Gert is shooting Jews who have done something, and he's just shooting everyone to get them to confess about something. And then Schindler changes his mind and decides he will help this girl get her parents out. So it's a scene where you have both the evil and the good debating each other, and you can see in a guy who's such an opportunist like Schindler, he could go either way, but he eventually goes in a good way. All right, so again, it's, Schindler said, and I think it's true, and you can show other scenes, that he was an unlikely hero, that he wanted, Schindler very early on after the war, in the late 1940s, 1950s, tried to get his story produced as a movie. And he went to one of the most famous survivor directors in Germany, and he tried to sell it. He said, because if someone like me could rescue Jews, there's no excuse for any other German. And he says, I'm not necessarily a good person, but even I saw that this was wrong. And I think you can do that. So as I promised at the beginning, I want to hear from teachers, parents, grandparents who are here, what books and movies they use to teach their children or pupils about the Holocaust, as well as to answer questions. And if you can tell me how they worked or if they didn't. So let's turn it over to questions and comments. Thank you. Are we not getting any questions? What about in the chat room? I'm seeing lots of people using the chat room.
Lori, I was posting your reading list in the chat, but it's not open to the audience, so we're taking it through the Q&A.
Okay.
Okay. Reading one from, I'm in Q&A here. Reading one from Melissa Weintraub. Not a question. In regard to fairy tales, there is an adult book, nonfiction, in which the grandmother tells her three granddaughters a fairy tale that isn't quite like the ones their friends know. After the grandmother's death, the youngest explores what happened to her grandmother during the war and discovers the fairy tale was actually her story. I'm sorry, I can't remember the name. Does this ring any bells?
It's not ringing a bell right now to me, but I did turn 75 today, so I can blame my memory.
Okay, well, I can relate to that. I'm 76 actually. Okay, I'll read second one. What would you say makes a good children's story about the Holocaust?
Well, again, it depends on the age group. So that earlier group, it's really about issues of exclusion, standing up for people. A lot of people talk about, there's one I didn't mention for that early age called the Tattooed Torah, a very popular book that has recently been made into a movie by the Shoah Foundation, a cartoon. But it's about, it deals more with what was destroyed, Jewish traditions, the importance of a Torah. This Torah gets confiscated in Germany, and eventually it gets marked. That's the tattoo. And eventually it's recovered and restored. And so it tells you a lot about what's destroyed and what's lost. And I think that's an important thing to do. As you get older, that 9 to 12 group, I think there it's probably more important to talk about child agency, that children can change things, that they can protest. That's only, the little rabbit in Terrible Things says things could have been different, but the little rabbit didn't do anything. In the 9 to 12 group, you get kids who are actually changing things. You can have some tougher stories, but I think given the current climate and the difficulties with parents objecting to things, I think you're going to have trouble showing anything graphic in that 9 to 12 group. I think with high school students, since PG-13 means, can show a lot of violence and kids have seen it, you're more able then to show what surviving on the run is like and how difficult that can be, what the persecution, the worst aspects of the persecution, what perpetrators were like, and even the ghettos and the camps. And those messages you don't have to disguise as much or soften as much as you do with the earlier groups.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, another one, adding on. Also, what do you think is the best children's story about the Holocaust? P.S. Happy birthday, and I like that little song you sang at the beginning. Okay.
All right.
With that encouragement, the nice easy question. Best children's story ever. What do you have?
The best children. Well, for a long time, and in my book, I thought that The Island on Bird Street was just an amazing movie and an amazing book. Because it shows, the privations, but it also shows the ingenuity of this kid. And it also shows how the love of reading Robinson Crusoe becomes kind of, he learns from that, from this book that his grandfather or his uncle gave him, that you can work on your resources, and even in a desert island like the emptied ghetto, you can find ways to feed yourself, how to hide, how to do things. It also is a good book because there's a scene where he goes over the wall to the Aryan side, and at first he's taunted by a bunch of Polish kids. They call him a Jewfish. They suspect him, but then on the other hand, there's a young girl whose family takes him in and gives him a good meal and a shower. He goes back into the ghetto because he told his father he would stay in that place where his father had left him. He goes back to the ghetto, but it shows both sides. There's one German who could have killed him, who kind of knows he's there, who doesn't. And there's another one he has to kill, who happens upon him. And so you get that wider variety. I think it's really, really well done. The Run Boy Run is very good as well. An amazing film. And the other thing, and I talked a little bit about this, the early thing with Anne Frank, it wasn't that they minimized Anne's Jewishness, but it certainly wasn't, in the movies, she does say, well, we had to wear Jewish stars and we were persecuted. And there's a number of spots, they have the Hanukkah service celebration. But Jewishness is not so central. In the more recent ones, it is more central. So you saw it in that one thing. They told us we were going to Palestine to get us, in the trains when they took us to the transit camps. And in the end, where the kid, Shrulik, can decide, does he want to remain Christian and Catholic and live now with a family that's adopted him for a while, or does he want to go to Palestine and be with his people? And he chooses to go with his people. So that's a remarkable movie, I think, as well. But again, it's all age related. I think for what it does, Miracle at Midnight is very well done.
Thank you. Okay, interesting question by someone else who congratulates you on your birthday, by the way, and also like the song. Mentions, quote, my third grade class read Dr. Seuss's Sneetches. It was a good basic we versus them book. one student immediately compared the characters to the Holocaust. So those who knew about the show got it.
Yeah. Yeah, no, in fact,
I thought of that.
there's this lovely, the Oregon website is very good because it has talks that were given, I guess, at a planning conference on the curriculum. And it has this one teacher, I wish I could remember her name, from CSU LA. But she talks about the books, and Sneetches is one, in fact, she talks about. Another one is Yertle the Turtle, which is about, if you stop something early, maybe you can prevent the worst things from happening. So I think there are a lot of films. I think there's a lot of children's films that aren't necessarily Holocaust based that can lead you there.
Yeah.
And so, and some of the person who was mentioning the fairy tales before, fairy tales are tough. I mean, fairy tales started in the 19th century, and these were tales of nationalism originally.
Yes.
And they were pretty violent, and they still are. Many of them still are. And they're often about persecuting the odd person, the person who doesn't fit in. So many of these can be worked in, but certainly the Sneetches and Yertle the Turtle are good places to start.
Okay. And let's see. Another one. Gee, it's nice to see several of my students here. Are there any graphic novels like Mouse that you would recommend for middle and high school ages?
I don't know graphic novels as well, but there's a nice book on Holocaust graphic novels by Victoria Ahrens. I have it here. My wife is here. It's on the top over there. I'll get you the title in a second. I would get it myself, but then you'd see I'm wearing jeans with this nice shirt.
It's your birthday. You're free to dress as you choose.
All right, you're gonna see my pants here, I guess. Yeah. Just called Holocaust Graphic Novels by Victoria Ahrens. I think it came out last year or the year before. And it would have them, but I know there's a bunch of them. And I mean, the amount of children's literature that's come out, and it has to do, like I said, with the fact that it's being taught in school. So there's a market for it.
I mean,
and there's a lovely, if you want to deal with older kids, you could probably deal with it. This is taken from a cartoon called I Was the Child of Survivors, of Holocaust Survivors. It's about 20 minutes long, and it's just about how difficult it is to grow up with parents realizing they have this trauma that they don't talk too much about, but then when they're with their friends, all their parents' friends are Holocaust survivors, and so that's I'm not sure what age group she put that at, but there's a lot of them. There's a lot of them.
Okay. Oh, here's one from Audrey, a long time supporter of the Holocaust program here. Okay, what is your impression of Mila 18 by Leon Uris? I was introduced to this in high school.
Well, it's certainly a long book, and as I recall, the TV movie made from it is also quite long, so it's difficult to use. And I'm trying to think if there's a better thing on the Warsaw Ghetto uprising that would be for kids, and right now I'm blanking out on it. But I mean, it has fictionalizations, but it's decent. It's just I would view it as just too long. When I look, even for college students, I try to always make my books 200 pages or less if I can. You don't want to intimidate them, but it certainly has its moments. There's more recent, I think it's called Uprising, which was also a mini series, but there's some wonderful areas, clips that you can get out of there about the Warsaw Ghetto uprising. Was really done well in a film which is tough, but I think kids might be able to watch and be impressed by is Korczak, the Polish film about Janusz Korczak.
Yes.
And Korczak was, for those of you who don't know, was this amazing Jewish doctor. He was a radio personality as well in Poland. And when the Holocaust occurred and the Jews were ghettoized, he volunteered, and he was kind of a forerunner of anti-authoritarian libertarian education. He created a ghetto for children who had been orphaned, and he let them self-govern it. And it's an amazing film about that. And there's some scenes in there that are, he has a debate where he's trying to save kids, and he goes to the Jewish council member and he says, I need this amount of food. And the Jewish council member basically says, you know, we're trying really hard to do this, but we only have so much. And basically he goes into a rationale for why they collaborate with the Germans. Mm. And it's really well done. And I'm trying to think, I mean, there's violence in it, but it's kind of a gentle movie. And even the ending is very gentle. The ending is, Korczak had an opportunity to hide or to go underground under false papers. He was offered by all sorts, he was beloved in Poland. And he refused to take it, and instead he went on the train with his children to Treblinka. And the last scene is, instead of showing them in Treblinka, it shows the train decoupling, ending up in a field, the kids all running out and climbing up what looks like a ladder to heaven. Mm. And so I haven't looked at what its rating is. I should have thought, but there's a number of others that the Courageous Heart of Irena Sendler, which deals with the Warsaw Ghetto, but with a rescuer, is also very good. And that you easily could show to high school students without any problems.
Let's see. I do have a few questions of my own. So first of all, you mentioned that there was an adaptation, at any rate, of A Number of the Stars, but I've long wondered, why is there no movie, a cinematic version of it? Yeah. Has Lois Lowry disapproved of this? It's just, in many ways, it's almost ideal.
Yeah, no, I would think so. I agree with you, and it's funny. I was trying to find one, and then I was looking at I thought maybe they say somewhere in the credits or on the Internet Movie Database that Miracle at Midnight at least is inspired by Miracle, inspired by Number of the Stars. I couldn't find that, but when I plugged in Number of the Stars, I thought maybe there is a movie. So I put Number of the Stars movie, and it came up Midnight at Miracle at Midnight. So I mean, they're so close together in terms. I'm surprised Disney wasn't sued for plagiarism. So I don't know why she didn't do that. I mean, but there's other movies. I mean, why, Elie Wiesel didn't like movies about the Holocaust, but Night is such an obvious movie. It would present itself as such a useful and valuable film to make. And there's a lot of films like that just don't get made, and I don't know why.
Well, that one, that by the way was recommended to me to purchase for, I guess she was then about 10.
Yeah, that's the right age.
My daughter, way back when it was pretty new, and frankly, I don't know if my daughter ever read it. However, I read it and I thought it was fantastic. So, okay, a kind of difficult question, maybe moving away from films that are oriented toward children, but a very difficult theme to deal with honestly in a in a Holocaust course is the rather tortured relationship between Christians and Jews historically. And it would almost be better if one could start the history with Vatican II and perhaps look back to earlier periods through flashbacks. But is there, can you think of a film that might be suitable, at least for high schoolers, that deals heavily with church rethinking of attitudes toward Jews, of the deicide issue, which of course is done very well in Nostra Aetate, the pronouncement by Vatican II. I'm just wondering if there's any, if you first of all know of any films that take seriously the reformist period after the war that might work for older children.
Well, there's quite a few films about John Paul, biopics, biographical films about him. So you can see the evolution of that relationship. But the film that you're talking about immediately, there, by the way, is a whole genre of films, which I give a lecture on. I've never written on, which I call Christian Holocaust films. And they're about church responses. And Amen, the one about trying to get the Pope, based on The Deputy, by Hakuth, about trying to persuade the Pope to condemn the Holocaust and call upon Christians to help Jews, is probably the best of them. It is a powerful movie, and it gives you two sides. It has a very sympathetic young novitiate who wants to help the Jews, in fact, who decides when the Jews are being deported from Rome that he will go on the train and die with them. So that's a powerful film. The Ninth Day deals with priests. Dachau had a special camp just for clergy who were arrested, and one Catholic clergyman is allowed to go out of Dachau to persuade the Bishop of Luxembourg not to criticize the Nazis. And so there's all these debates about what should be done with the Jews, what should be the moral stance of the church. So that's a powerful one as well. And then there's ones that are the most popular Christian Holocaust movie is The Hiding Place, about Corrie ten Boom. She was an evangelical Christian, and the movie was produced by Billy Graham. And it has a very evangelical Christian message, but within there you see that not all, though her father and the Ten Boom family hid Jews, you see a lot of Christians who don't want to help Jews. And that, by the way, I only talked about public schools today. You would choose different movies, probably if you're teaching in a parochial school, whether it be Jewish or Christian. And that is the most assigned book and movie in home schools and in Christian parochial schools, is The Hiding Place. There's also a good movie about Bonhoeffer called Agent of Grace.
If I might interrupt.
And there's an Oregon connection there, right?
Yes.
With Agent of Grace, yeah.
Professor Kristen Stair,
yeah,
who taught German here at Oregon State for many years, produced that, a real labor of love on Bonhoeffer.
So there are these films. The earlier stuff you don't see much. I mean, about dealing with deicide and Jews killing Christ. There's the one scene. I mean, this is a movie I wouldn't even assign to adults. There's a movie that came out last year of The Painted Bird, which, if you know The Painted Bird by Jerzy Kosinski, is really one of the most visceral Holocaust novels ever written. And he has that scene. And there's another one called Pieces of the Lord, which is a Polish movie, both of which feature scenes in which a kid that they don't know is Jewish is to play Judas in a passion play.
Mm-hmm.
And everyone assumes he is Judas and starts attacking him as the bad Jew. And so in either of those, you get this sense of the widespread stereotypes that people held of Jews, often religious stereotypes.
Okay, thank you very much.
If there's no more questions,
that's it for me.
Yeah. Okay. Well, then thank you very much. And if people want to get, it's hard to read this list, I know, on the chat. So if anybody wants to email me, and you can get my email from Paul. Once you email him, and I will send you the full list, which not only has this list, but it has bibliography on the debates about what age we should teach kids the Holocaust, has a bibliography of books about Holocaust film, and I think it would be helpful, if you're planning classes, or if you have a kid who asks you the question, what's this all about?
Thank you so much, Lori. Here is someone who's written in, I'd like that bibliography.
Okay.
I assume that's the one that you sent to me. So
yeah.
I could.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Why don't you do that? And so contact Paul, and like I said, it has a lot more, and it does it by age group.
Oh, yes.
As I was preparing this, I realized how many things I left off. The internet can be a dangerous place, but it also can be a very useful place. And there's a lot of material, a lot of curricular material available now on the internet for teaching Holocaust to younger kids.
Okay. And,
thank you.
Thank you so much, Lori.
Okay.